Welcome to this webinar on the Assessor and Verifier training part of the system. In this overview, we'll look at the student interface, the Assessor interface and the functionality, along with approving assessments and identifying gaps, having a look at the Verifier options and the Verifier functionality, along with some reporting if you're given admin access. The first step of the overview is to log in as a candidate. The easiest way to demonstrate the system, or the best way to understand the system, is how it looks for the student as well. So what I'll do is I'll just get logged in as a student now. In this example, John Smith only has student access, and this is a page that he logs into. On the home screen, he'll see his active courses, so any e-learning courses that he needs to complete, along with his View Completed section where he can see his completed courses and access any certification that's been added to his records. To the right of that section, there's also Training Requirements. If a training matrix has been added to John's profile, he'll see his full training role, which in this case is a HLO training role. He has this donut chart here where he can identify any expired courses or courses that are not yet complete, and of course the green completed courses. The user can filter on these items and see the expired course quite quickly. Coming back to the Training Requirements tab, if the user also expands or presses on the plus sign for the role, they'll be able to see all of the requirements that are needed to be competent within this training role. You can see here this user currently has some completions and some gaps that they'll need to work on. The second tab, after My Training, is the My Competence tab. When the user clicks on this, they will see the competence requirements that have been set up. So a user can have training requirements and they can also have competence requirements, so two different matrices that are added to their profile. John here, our example user, he's been added to the first aider role and also the HLO role. So it is possible for a user to have more than one profile. If you've got any kind of secondary requirements or additional requirements, they can be added on to the user profile. So John, yep, he's a first aider and helideck operator as well. So he can have both of those roles. Again, within My Competence, you have this pie chart and a key. So if the user is looking to identify anything specific, where maybe gaps have been identified by an assessor, or where they're not yet competent, or competencies that have expired, they can filter on those specific elements. Competence Requirement tab will allow the user to expand the role, and they'll see the requirements that have been asked for them. Now, there is multiple ways to build this in the system. It's quite common to have the competence group requirement to categorize the competencies that will be needed. There are different types of competencies in the system. There are straightforward competence assessments. You can also have competence levels where you can be deemed competent at level 3 or level 4, for example. That ranges from 1 to 5. On this example, you can see that John has completed some of his competencies already. These will be in green. He also has elements where the assessor has identified gaps, and that will need to be reviewed by the candidate. Within the requirement, it's very easy for the user to apply for assessment. If I click on View Details here for Incident Investigations, I can see all of the information that makes up this competence. I can see what the suggested evidence is, and towards the bottom, I can add the evidence that I want to support my assessment. So the candidate has two options here, one to add from Evidence Locker and one to upload document that's not already in the system. So if a document has been added, they can click Add from Evidence Locker, add the evidence, and that now sits as a status needs assessment. It'll be available for the assessor once we apply for assessment. Once a candidate has added all the relevant evidence, the only step for them to now complete is apply for assessment. They can at this point add an evidence relevant summary in, so if they want to summarize the evidence that's being provided, they can add that so that the assessor can see it. Apply for assessment. That changes the status of this requirement to in progress and will now be available for the assessor to accept or reject. There's also a comment section and a support material box. The comments section allows a back and forward conversation with the candidate and the assessor. So if there's any questions that need to be asked, or if the assessor has any feedback on the requirement, they can put that in there and both will be able to see that conversation history. There's also the support material tab, so if there's any additional documentation to support the assessment, the candidate will be able to view that within there. Just jumping back to the My Competence tab before we log in as the assessor to take a look at how that's actually approved in the system. There is other tabs along the top that's available for the students. So they've got the option for Needs My Attention. That's any requirement that's read or gaps identified where they can review those. There is sections for requirements history and other competence. So if a requirement date set for a role and is no longer needed, it will be still visible for the user in the history tab so they don't lose anything that they've completed before. Same with other competence. If the requirement has been completely removed from the profile, they will see the completed competencies in the other competence tab. The student also has access to the evidence locker. So in here, they can see any evidence that they've uploaded previously and saved into the locker, the date that was generated and the reference code. They can also view and download that evidence from this part of the system. So if they're looking to extract any information from the system, they can do that. They can also see where that evidence has been used, which competencies they've got that sitting against. The download option is in the top right-hand corner if they want to take a copy of the evidence that they've submitted. The final step is the assessment plans. We'll view assessment plans as the assessor, as it's up to the assessor to actually create the individual assessment plan for the user. So we'll take a look at that when we're logged in as the assessor, which we'll just move on to now. In this section, we'll log in as the assessor and take a look at the functionality that is available for that role. So we have the assessor example here is Rachel Taylor. So I'm just going to log in as Rachel just now. As an assessor in the system, you will also have student access. So when you're given an elevated role, you will have access to the basic student level as well to complete your own courses and any requirements that you need to do. The most important thing is the elevated access is done through the top right-hand corner. So if you click on your name in the top right-hand corner, you'll see the access levels that you have. Rachel here is an assessor, so we can click on the Assessor tab. And then we'll be looking at the system through the assessor functionality. So we'll be able to perform any actions that we need to as an assessor. You can see here the competence that I applied for assessment on earlier, logged in as John Smith, has pulled through, and Rachel Taylor has been asked as added as an assessor for that requirement. So Rachel can assess John here on the requirement that's pulled through. There's also an example competence in here where the verifier has said verification issues found, so that will be listed on the assessments tab for the assessor. They'll be able to see where a verifier has identified issues. If I click on Needs Assessment for the incident investigations, one which we sent across earlier, the assessor will see a very similar look to a very similar layout as the student does as well. So they see the full description, they see the suggested evidence, any relevant summary that has been provided by the candidate will be listed in here, and the assessor will have access to make notes. So this is notes that will be recorded against the assessment. So any statements you would like to write, the assessor can add in a note here. We can save that. There's no limit on the number of notes that you can create. This will act as an audit trail and will sit against the competence assessment in the system. Towards the bottom, as the assessor, you will see the evidence that has been provided, and you'll see the status as needs assessment. You do also have the options that the student have. You can add additional evidence to support the assessment for this candidate. That can be from your own assessor locker or uploading new evidence that you maybe have stored on your computer. Clicking on the drop-down arrow, we can actually download the file that has been provided as evidence. And we've got these two main options here, so approve or reject. It's important to approve and reject all pieces of evidence, so not all bits will be relevant. And this status here, approve or reject, doesn't ultimately deem the candidate competent or not competent. It doesn't affect overall status, but you should approve or reject all pieces of evidence. So once I've downloaded this, if as the assessor I'm happy and I believe that's enough, I'll click on approved and the status will change against that piece of evidence. You'll notice here towards the top that the assessment still sits as in progress, so it didn't actually change the status as such of the assessment. And we still have our two main buttons. So as the assessor, once we've reviewed all of the evidence, we can deem the candidate competent or we can select gaps identified. Clicking on gaps identified, you'll see that you're allowed to provide feedback to the user. So this will be sent in the comments box and will allow the user to review your feedback that you've suggested. You can edit that within here and then click send. The other option is candidate is competent. So if you're happy with the evidence, you can deem the candidate competent. That will then change the status of the application in the system to approved, and that will show as completed in all reports for administrators. The assessments tab is really where you will complete all of the assessments or all of the ones that require your attention. However, you will have the competence overview section where you can review any of the competencies that you have been added to an assessor on. So if you're looking to check the status of a specific competence, you can do that within here. You can click on the requirement. You can see how many users have been added to that requirement. You can see any support material that has been added to it. And you can also get a breakdown of each user that has been assigned. So in this case, it's just John Smith. He's yet to complete that, and there's no kind of trail of that one yet until the progress has been started. Just jumping on to assessment plans. So as the assessor, you can create a plan for a user. You can see here all of the users that you have access to will be within the list. And if we search for John Smith, because we're an assessor of John, he'll be available and we can create a plan. You can give the plan a title and a start and end date. So when do you want the user to focus on this plan? So we can say within the month of March, we would require you to complete the following competencies. So what we do is click Add Competence to then select the requirements from John's role that you want him to focus on. So we can pick the items that we would like John to complete. Once that has been created, you do have the option to print that. So you can get a printed copy of the assessment plan in PDF format. And that will show you exactly what you created with the elements that you selected. That will now pull through to John's profile as an assessment plan, and he'll also be able to see which requirements you've set as required through that start and end date. You've also, as the assessor, got options to edit the suggested evidence. So if you're looking for something specific, you can select the relevant evidence that you're looking for. The Assessor tab is designed to be really easy to use. So really, you've got those three main tabs. The main one being the Assessment tab, where you'll see all of the requirements that require your attention. And from there, we'll just move on to the Verifier role. We will now log in as a verifier in Trainingportal. If you have verifier access, you should be taken straight into the verifications page. On the screen, you'll see a donut chart with the three statuses of verified, issues found, and not verified, with the percentage for each. You can use this key here and the parts in the pie chart to filter out any unwanted competence assessments. You'll also see the target that has been set for you as a verifier and the percentage that you've reached so far. Looking down towards the bottom, you'll see all of the competencies that need your attention. The ones in grey need to be verified, and the ones in green have been verified. You'll see here that the assessor that I'm logged in as has already verified some competencies here, and you'll see the verification date along with the assessment date as well. In this column, you will also see the assessor name, and towards the end, you have the buttons that you can use. If you click on View, you'll be taken to the competency that's already verified. You'll see the verified details, and you'll also see a similar screen that both the student and the assessor sees when they click on the assessment. So you'll see the full description, the suggested evidence, and the evidence that has been provided by the candidate or the assessor towards the bottom. So you can download that and take a look at it. If I move back to the Verification tab at the top, as a verifier, you really only do have access to one main tab, and that's the Verifications button. And in the application column, you will see the button Verify on the assessments that you can verify. So looking again at a different competency, again, you see the full description, you see when it was approved and who it was assessed by. You can expand the suggested evidence, and towards the bottom, you will see the assessment notes. So if any statements have been added by the assessor, you'll see that listed in that section there. And again, towards the bottom, you'll see that evidence column, and you'll see the status, whether that's been approved or rejected by the assessor. Towards the top, you've really got two main buttons as a verifier. You have the Issues Found option and the Verify. So if you think there's issues being found with this assessment, you can click on that one and provide feedback. That will go back to the assessor to review the feedback that you have provided and decide if that should be reopened to the student, or if they should add additional evidence or provide more information. So this Send button will send your feedback back to the assessor. If you click on Verify, again, you can provide feedback. It's recommended that you provide feedback on both options, so on the verification and on issues found. So if you provide feedback there, and click Verify, your name will then be added as the verifier, and your comment will be added as well as an audit trail in the system. Just jumping back to verifications, that will now show the element that I've just verified in green, and the target percentage will increase. You'll see the instant changes on the donut chart here. Andrew Wilson, the verifier that I'm logged in as here, has additional level of access in the system. You'll be able to access the different levels of access in the system using the key in the top right hand corner when you click on your name. So once you click on your name, you'll see the drop down menu, and Andrew here has both verifier, assessor, student and admin access. By default, all accounts will have student access, and any additional levels of access that you're given will be shown here in the top right hand corner. Just switching to the admin view on Andrew Wilson's account here, I just want to show you a couple of reports that you'll be interested in running if you're given admin access to the system. Clicking on the Reports tab at the top, you will see a whole range of reports, most interestingly the competence ones along the top. So you have 4 competence reports that you'd be looking to run towards the top. The competence status report would give you one big long list of the full status of all of the assessments that have been allocated in the system. You can then also run matrix style reports where you have the users listed on one side and the requirements listed on the other, where you can see if it's complete or not met yet. Running the competence status report, you'll see once you click on all of the reports, the wizard that you're asked to run through is quite similar. So first of all, you'll be asked to identify the users that you want to report on. Now that can be done by business unit, and that can be done by individual users as well, or you can just take all of the users in the system. It's important that you select the right catalog that you're going to run the report from. In Trainingportal, it's possible to have different catalogs for both training and competence. So you want to make sure that you're running the requirement or the report on the Mintra Competence Demonstration catalog in this case. You then have the option to select specific roles or competencies. So if you're looking to report on a specific requirement or a specific role, you'll be able to do that from the catalog just by selecting the roles that you would like to report on, and then click Save. The alternative is you can take all requirements. I would recommend always taking Show Only Mandatory Requirements to show everything that has been set as a requirement within the user profile. You have additional options here towards the bottom if you'd look to filter out any of the requirements which fall under competence groups, for example. You can tick this box if you're just looking to see the status of competence groups and not the individual requirements. If the user has a requirement within the Other Competence tab, you can also report on those by ticking that box there. Towards the bottom, we're able to report on specific statuses, so whether you just want to see completions, or if you just want to see where it's not complete, you can tick those boxes. You can also add in a date range as well if you're looking for completions across a specific date. You can do look-ahead reports as well in the system, so if you're looking for competencies that are going to expire within the next month, you'd be able to run that report as well. In this example here, or take all statuses. Towards the bottom, you can add columns into your report from the left-hand side. Likewise, you can take out any unwanted columns from the right-hand side just by clicking Remove. Once you're ready, you can generate that report to your email address. You can run it straight away in the system, or you can save that and have that scheduled and sent out weekly or monthly on a scheduled basis. For this example, we'll just generate the report. Once the report has been generated, just click on it to open it. All of our reports will open in Excel format. And if you click Enable Editing at the top, you'll then be able to see the full competence status report with all of the dates and the expiry dates that have been added. You'll also be able to filter on all of these columns on the left-hand side. Towards the bottom, you also have the Data tab. If you click on the Data tab, you will be able to generate a chart by person and by organizational unit. So pretty quickly, you can have information on the status for each user. You can see how much of percentage is green and competent, and also importantly, how much is in progress and still waiting to be assessed. You can get an idea of where each user is with their assessments.